There are some mysteries that refuse to be solved. Cases where the evidence only deepens the questions. And then there's the Dyatlov Pass incident, a tragedy so disturbing, so inexplicable that it's haunted investigators for over 60 years. Let me take you back to January 1959, the Ural Mountains in Russia. 10 experienced hikers set out on what should have been a challenging but routine winter expedition. They were students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute. Young, strong, and led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old with multiple skiing expeditions under his belt. One member turned back early due to health issues. He was the lucky one. The other 9 would never return. What happened on that mountain on the night of February 1st has never been explained. Not really. Not in any way that makes sense. The last known photograph taken by the group shows them setting up camp on a slope. They were digging into the snow, preparing for the brutal night ahead. Visibility was poor, winds were picking up, but this was nothing they hadn't handled before. When they didn't return as scheduled, a search party was sent out. What they found has become the stuff of nightmares. The tent was discovered on February 26th, partially collapsed, covered in snow, and here's where it gets disturbing. The tent had been cut open from the inside. Long, deliberate slashes through the fabric. As if the hikers had been so desperate to escape that they couldn't even take the time to use the entrance. Their belongings were still inside. Boots, warm clothes, supplies, everything they needed to survive in negative 30-degree temperatures. And yet they ran, barefoot or in socks, barely dressed, into the freezing darkness. The first 2 bodies were found at the edge of a forest about a mile from the tent. They were under a large cedar tree, wearing almost nothing, shoeless. One was in his underwear. The branches of the tree were broken up to 15 feet high. Someone had climbed it, but why? What were they looking at or looking for? Between the tent and the cedar tree, researchers found 3 more bodies. They were positioned as if they were trying to crawl back to the tent. One of them was Igor Dyatlov himself, frozen in the snow, face down. The medical examiner noted something strange. These 5 showed no signs of major trauma. Hypothermia was listed as the cause of death, but that didn't explain why they fled the tent, why they left everything behind, why experienced hikers would make decisions that guaranteed their own deaths. It gets worse. The remaining 4 bodies weren't found until May, when the snow began to melt. They were in a ravine under more than 12 feet of snow, and their injuries were catastrophic. One lady had massive chest trauma. Her ribs were fractured. The force required was compared to a high-speed car crash, but there were no external wounds, no cuts or bruises on her skin. Her tongue was missing, along with her eyes and parts of her face. One man had severe chest fractures. His eyes were gone too. Another man, skull damage. Another man had a fractured skull so severe that it had caved in. The medical examiner stated that no human could have inflicted these injuries. The force was too great, and yet there were no external wounds, nothing to indicate a fight or an attack. Some of their clothing was found to be radioactive, not heavily, but enough to be noted in the reports. And then there are the photographs. When the bodies were recovered, so were the cameras. Multiple cameras belonging to different members of the group. The film was developed, and most of the images were mundane. the journey, the landscape, smiling faces. But the final photographs are different. The last few frames show the group on that final day, setting up camp in worsening conditions. The light is dim. The wind is clearly brutal. You can see the strain on their faces. And then there's the photograph that nobody can explain. One of the cameras contained a roll of film with a final frame. It's almost entirely black, overexposed or underexposed, depending on who you ask. Some say it shows a vague, blurred figure. Others say it's just a smudge of light. Some investigators insist there's something there, a shape, a presence, something the hikers saw before they died. Another photo, taken from inside the tent, shows what looks like bright lights in the distance, glowing orbs against the night sky. Were they flares, military tests, something else? The official Soviet investigation concluded that the hikers died due to a compelling natural force. That was it. No further explanation. The case was closed. The files were sealed, and the theories have never stopped. An avalanche? Possible. But there was no evidence of one. And it doesn't explain the bizarre injuries or why they cut their way out of the tent. Military testing? The area was relatively close to known military sites. Could they have stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see? That might explain the radioactive clothing, but it doesn't explain the crushed ribs with no external wounds. Some have suggested infrasound, a phenomenon where wind passing through the mountains creates low-frequency sound waves that cause panic, paranoia, and hallucinations. Maybe they were driven mad by a sound they couldn't even consciously hear. Maybe that's why they ran. Others point to the indigenous Mansi people, who considered the mountain sacred and dangerous. They called it Kholat Syakhl, Dead Mountain. They refused to go there. Did they know something? And then there are the darker theories, the ones that don't involve science or logic, the ones that ask, what if something else was on that mountain? Something that doesn't show up on a map or in a textbook. Something that watches. Something that hunts. Because here's what we know for certain. 9 experienced hikers fled their only shelter in the middle of a brutal winter night. They were so terrified that they didn't stop to grab boots or coats. They ran barefoot into the freezing dark. Some of them climbed a tree as if trying to see something or get away from something. 4 of them suffered injuries so severe that experts compared them to car crashes. But there were no external wounds, no signs of a struggle. Their cameras captured something in those final hours, blurred, strange, unidentifiable. And the Soviet government sealed the case and refused to speak about it for decades. Whatever happened on Dead Mountain that night, it was so catastrophic, so inexplicable that it defied explanation. And maybe that's the most terrifying part. Not that we don't know what happened, but that maybe deep down we do, and we just don't want to believe it. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the most chilling, unsolved mysteries in history. A reminder that there are places in this world where the rules don't apply, where the answers only lead to more questions, and where 9 people met a fate so horrifying that we're still trying to understand it more than 60 years later. If you ever find yourself in the Ural Mountains near that slope where the tent was found, take a moment, listen to the wind, and ask yourself, what could be so terrifying that you'd run barefoot into the frozen night? Because whatever it was, it's still out there. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.